can actually get started. It's just a few seconds away, but I think is good enough for us to get started. So thank you everyone for making the time to join me today. And today we are going to talk about managing images in large-scale Drupal websites. So the topics will be obviously focused on Drupal 8, but the media module, which is what we are going to be using a lot for images and media in general in Drupal, is pretty much the same on Drupal 9. So I feel that pretty much everything that we cover here applies to both Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. As far as the configurations that I'll be demoing for image styles, responsive image styles, and things like that. However, the principles that we will be talking about today, which is how to manage image, how to know when to use one technique over the other, how to make use of source set, attributes, and picture element, those principles apply to any project, any site that you build, regardless of whether it's Drupal or not. So if you do work with other technologies besides Drupal, you will be able to still apply all those principles and hopefully techniques that we'll be covering in those projects, not just Drupal. So let's see here. So we'll be first going over taking an inventory of images. That's very critical. I find that if you're able to do that before you start with any image configurations, that it'll really make your life easier. We will talk about how to plan for image usage. We'll talk about art direction, what that is, which spoiler alert is when you use the picture element, and we'll talk about when to use the picture element, right, and how. And then we'll dive into image styles, how properly name image styles and responsive image styles, how to configure those in Drupal and make sure that you are making the best use of those. So I'll be doing a demo, and I'm hoping that I don't have to rush too much through the demo. Last time I did this, I did have to rush a little bit, but I think I had less time than I do now. So I'll try not to talk too much. So we are Media Current, and our people are impelled to constantly improve the technology for our clients. And our mission is to bring together the most talented team members to provide world-class solutions for the web. We are always hiring, so please make sure that you check out our MediaCurrent.com website. We have training programs in place, so you can get those at MediaCurrent.com/training. And let us know if we can help you. So my name is Mario Hernandez, and I am the head of learning here at Media Current. We focus on building large-scale website. We provide training for the community and also for our clients. We have been doing online trainings lately because of the COVID-19 situation, but some of you know that I do training at different camps and events. So hopefully we can resume to that sometime soon, because I do miss meeting people in person. So I've been working with Drupal for over 10 years, primarily as a front-end developer, and I am a trainer and a speaker, and I also co-host the Media Current Open Waters podcast. I'll be trying to keep an eye on the chat as much as I can. And so, but if you do have any questions, go ahead and post those, and I will definitely try to address those at the end of the discussion. If you can post those with the prefix of Q, just to make sure that we can identify those quickly. So this session is pretty much for everybody, really. Site builders, people who are, creating the pieces of a website sometimes, developers who are wiring things in the back end or front end, and the content manager, content editors, right, who rely on the work that site builders and developers do in order to be able to provide rich content to our website and our audiences. The goals for this session is to be able to learn, how to be able to make sure that you serve the right image at the right time and at the right device, learn the different ways in which you can do that, and also how to effectively address responsive images on your website in a way that it doesn't affect performance in a negative way, right? We want our images to not really slow our website down. And hopefully with these techniques that we'll talk today, you'll be able to learn some of the tricks and tips that can help you improve performance. One of the first things that I always like to do when working on a website, on a large scale website, is to take inventory of the images, right? A lot of times we are fortunate enough to get designs like this, before we start with the project, right? And this will be the ideal situation, right? This is kind of what you would aspire to have before you start with your project, because when you have designs like this, you can see pretty much, the various ways in which images will be used and served on your website. You will know what kind of aspect ratio to use. You'll know how images will be used. You'll notice patterns. If there's images that share the same aspect ratio or dimensions and things like that, you'll be able to identify this by reviewing all your design comps ahead of time. Unfortunately, we don't always have that luxury, but when you do, I encourage people to always go through the slides very carefully so you can identify those patterns in how images are being used and rendered on your website. As you can see, both of these projects that I'm showing here are projects that I've worked on personally, and they're pretty image heavy. And coming up with an efficient way to manage our images is certainly something that can improve the project performance. Not doing that properly can certainly jeopardize performance and the way project works, in addition to the level of maintenance that you will need to have with managing images and image styles in your website. So it's very important to make sure that your goal is always to reuse image configurations as much as possible, because that'll make your life and everybody else's life easier. Here's another example of different ways on how images are being used. So very, very important. So image styles, right? That's in Drupal, that's kind of what we use for managing images, and it works really well. Drupal does a really great job with that. That in combination with caching, it's really a great system to use. So image styles, there are some best practices, and taking full inventory, obviously, of the images will allow you to create proper image styles, right? You want to kind of avoid having to create image styles until you know and you fully understand the requirements for your images. Whenever possible, try to make images reusable, not one-offs, because that'll lead into, if you're creating one-offs type of image styles, it will lead into a lot of things to maintain long-term. And so as much as you can, try to use aspect ratios. I think that will get you the furthest, and with less image styles than any other method, right? Because if you use an aspect ratio based image style, you're able to use that anywhere else where that image uses the same aspect ratio. However, naming image styles and naming anything really is pretty hard. So you need to come up with names that not only reflect the aspects or attributes of your images, but they're also names that don't restrict you from using them on different areas of your website, different pages, right? So make sure that descriptor names are there, but not restrictive. And also you want to make sure that you use multipliers like 1x, 2x, because you want to make sure that you are accounting for high density, high resolution screens, and that will let you do just that. So here are an example of a bad naming for an image style, right? So if we look at this name, it'll be homepage article image. So the problem with this one is that it's too vague, right? It doesn't give us enough detail about the image. It doesn't say what the aspect ratio is. It doesn't tell us what the dimensions of this image is. For, the other problem is that based on the name, it seems like you can only use it on the homepage and for article content, right? So, but it doesn't say what type of article, was it teaser mode, full mode, and what if you want to use the same image style somewhere else? Well, technically you could, but because of this name, it's gonna look like you're putting the wrong image style, right? If you put it somewhere else that is not the homepage. So that is not a name that I would recommend. Instead, what I would recommend is something like this, something like 16:9, maximum 720 pixels. And so this gives us a lot of information, right? Is very detailed while still very flexible, because it gives us the aspect ratio. So we know that any 16:9 image can use it. And it tells us that it's a maximum width of 720 pixels. So we know that any image that is below 720, we can use this on. And also, it's not associated with any specific page or content, right? We can use it anywhere on your site, and it's reusable, right? So this will limit the number of image styles that you would need to create when you name things this way. So here's another bad example here, home image thumb wide. Again, not much detail, right? It's not very detail. And when you think about, not only visually, it doesn't give you a lot of information, but if you're a developer looking at code while you're debugging issues, right? If you see a name like this, it really doesn't tell you much either, whether you're using the right image style or not, right? So it's very hard to troubleshoot sometimes or debug issues when you don't know what the specifics of that image style are. Instead, you can have something like this, similar to the previous one, where a defined aspect ratio, a defined max width, right? Again, very generic while being very detailed at the same time. So this is kind of the naming conventions that I like to use because this then makes them as reusable as possible. Responsive image styles. And we'll take a look at some of the examples of the image styles that I've created for a demo. But let's talk about responsive image styles. They are not the same as image styles, right? So the way I like to think is that when it comes to naming conventions for responsive image styles, they're not as strict as naming image styles. Image styles names should target the image styles, right? When you're naming image styles, like we just saw before, you're targeting the images themselves. You know, what are some of the attributes of these images? But responsive image styles, to me, they should be targeting the use cases, right? Where are they going to be used? And an example here, a bad example would be homepage gallery images. Well, what if you have a gallery that is not on the homepage, right? Or what if you have a gallery that is different dimensions images, right? So instead, I could create a new responsive image style called image gallery, or simply just gallery, right? Because that is pretty clear. An example of a hero image, responsive image style, rather than getting too deep into the name, I can just call the responsive image style a hero image style. And that pretty much tells me all I need to know about that particular responsive image style. So here is a visual on how I kind of see this in my mind when it comes to, you know, what are image styles and what are responsive image styles. So image styles are the individual pieces, right? Each instance of an image template, if you want to call it that, right, is the one that defines the parameters for how big or how small an image will be rendered. And responsive image style is like a bundle. I like to call that a bundle, a collection of image styles that you can then apply to an image field on your Drupal site. And so this kind of helps me determine, you know, that relationship between all of them, because I can have multiple image styles in a single responsive image style, right? And at the end, when I'm configuring this, I'm just dealing with the responsive image style, as long as I have the right combination of images for that. So, so now let's jump into art direction. Okay, so what is art direction? And art direction is when you are pretty much trying to crop or change the way an image is rendered per breakpoint, for example. That is a simple way of putting it. There's more to it. But this visual here will give you an idea that when we have a large device, we can, you know, we have, excuse me, we have the luxury of displaying all the entire image. As you can see on the desktop here, we have a full image. As the devices get smaller, we can start to focus a little bit more on what is the most important piece of this image. And then if you look at the mobile image here, you can see that the focus at this point is just the person on the image. We don't need to see everything else. So being able to do this, being able to crop our images based on the device that we are planning to display this on is what typically in the context of images is what is called as art direction, right? Is being able to selectively say, for this small device, I want this piece of the image to display, not everything else. And we can achieve this in Drupal by using a combination of modules along with image styles, and we'll go in a minute into that. So this is art direction. So now when you use art direction, because we are telling the browser which image to use at each breakpoint, we are in a way forced to use what is called the picture element, the picture tag. This is an HTML5 tag. It's basically just a wrapper for the image tag. On its own, it doesn't do anything. It's just a wrapper, but it gives us several options. One of those is a media attribute, right? Where we can define a media query where we can say, in this case, we're saying if the maximum width of my device is 720 pixels, meaning that if my device is 720 pixels or smaller, I want to use the image called mobile JPEG. And I have an equivalent for 2x, right, for high density screen. The other media query here is if the device is 1200 pixels or smaller. So this will be between 720 and 1999, right? Then the image that I will use will be tablet. And for everything else, anything that doesn't fall within those two media criteria, that means if the device is larger than 1200, like 1201, then the desktop image will be used. And if there are any compatibility issues, if a browser does not support it, then a plain image type will be displayed. And that will be the fix for that. Now, I'm using max width here, and it's important to understand that when you are using max width as your media query, you need to provide the smallest image possible first. Because the way the browser will use this is that it will use the first element that fits the criteria that you're setting up here. For example, if I had, let's say if the maximum width 1200 item there was at the top, and I say I want a tablet image or a desktop image to show when that criteria is met. If I come with a mobile device, my mobile device will be smaller than 1200, which means it will meet that criteria. And then therefore, it will use the desktop image, which is a large image. And we don't want that, right? We obviously don't want to be serving large images to small devices. So the order in which you present this makes a big difference. And the order also depends on whether you are using minimum width or maximum width. So here is another example using minimum width. And notice how the order of the source sets is reversed. Because now I'm saying only if the device is 1200 pixels or larger, I want to use the desktop image, right? So this is the opposite of doing the maximum image. This is the minimum image. So only if it's 1200 pixels or larger, I want to use the desktop image. So that means that if I come with a mobile, my mobile device is not 1200 pixels or larger, right? Well, for the most part, things change all the time, but just as an example, right? So the mobile will not use that image. If I come in with my mobile device and I look at the next criteria, which is if my device is 720 pixels or larger, I want to use the tablet image, then it's possible that some mobile devices may be that big, but a traditional mobile device may not be that big, so it will not use the image, but instead it will use the mobile image. So just something to keep in mind on the order, when and how to arrange those, because that can really make a big difference. You definitely don't want to serve large images to small devices. Here, when you're using the picture element in Drupal, you are going to be using breakpoints, and you create those in your theme. This is an example of the Bartik theme and the breakpoints that it comes with. I added a couple of things just as an extra example. So notice the order where it says mobile, narrow, and wide, and the weight of each of those. Again, this is in line with what I was just talking about, that weight determines the order in which your images will be served and the order in which the browser will detect the images and use the specified device when it matches that criteria. So again, something to keep in mind there. It's got media query. We've added multiplier 1x and 2x so that we can determine when it's a high density or high resolution screen, we want to use images that are double the size than the regular image, right? That's what the 2x allows us to do. And again, we have media queries here for that. And we'll take a look at this in just a minute when we do the demo. Now, the problem with picture element is that, as you can see, this is from caniuse.com, a website that tells you whether a particular feature is supported by the browser and what that support looks like. So if you look at the very left column here, we know that IE 11 and below does not support the picture element. Now, there is a polyfill that you can use with the picture element called picture fill. And lucky for us, the responsive images module that comes in core with Drupal already provides that poly field. So we don't have to do that ourselves. It's already part of it, which is great. So that closes that support gap. But if you're doing this in a non-Drupal project, you most likely will need to implement that poly field yourself, which is not very difficult at all. But it's just something that you need to keep in mind if you are planning on supporting IE 11. So the gap that we see with the picture element, because remember, we're able to tell it which image to use, right? Which is great, because that's not something that we could do before. But now we can tell the browser, hey, if I have a small device, use this small image. If I have a large device, use this large image. However, the problem is that we are telling the browser which image to use. And the only criteria that we are basing that decision on is how big is our device. And that is not necessarily a good thing, because I'm going to give you an example that I always use is, let's say I'm working with my laptop, which is, Retina screen, which means is high resolution. So, but because my laptop is, pretty good size, based on the information that I was just showing, that means that by default, I will most likely get a large image when I'm looking at somebody's website, right? Because it's saying if my screen is bigger than 1200 pixels, give me this super large image. And if it's Retina screen, it's going to give me an image that is even twice as big. So I have a laptop, I'm going to get a super large image. But what if my connection is extremely, extremely poor? Then the browser is not going to care. It's still going to give me that super large image, regardless of what my connection speed is, right? So we can't just base the image size that we need to serve on the device size. Now, that's unfortunately the way it works with the picture element. And so something to keep in mind, that is why the picture element or the art direction approach is kind of the exception to the rule, right? That's only when you need to crop your images differently. It's not something that you will use as your default practice for serving images. For that, we're gonna cover that next. But this graph here tells us, what are some of the things that we know as developers when we're building a website, and what are some of the things that the browser knows when rendering a page or an image. So as far as the viewport dimensions, we don't know, right, as developers, how big a user's image device will be when they're looking at our website. But the browser knows, so it's got that information, right? Developers know what the image size relative to the viewport is, right? Because remember, we were looking at those design comps earlier. So we will know how big a client or a boss wants those images to display at, right, in relation to the viewport. But the browser doesn't know that when it's rendering the image. In fact, for the browser to know that, JavaScript and CSS needs to be completely loaded in order for the browser to know how big we want that image. As far as the screen density, we developers don't know whether it's a high density or not, but the browser knows that when it's rendering a page. And finally, we as developers know how big an image is when we're providing those images, uploading those images on the browser, right? We know how big those images are, but the browser doesn't know. So not only the browser doesn't know how big we want this image to be rendered at, but it doesn't know how big the image actually is when we are uploading them. So that's a gap that we need to close in order to let the browser, make a decision for us on what images to serve, right? So, so that is the gap that the picture element provides to us, that we don't have all that information and that we still need to tell the browser what to do for those reasons. But the other approach is to use switched resolution, right? And this is in the most cases, this is the rule. By default, this is the method that you should be using when serving images. And the picture element is the exception to the rule, right? Only when you need art direction. Now, in this case here, the example is that we have this image where all we are doing is reducing the size of the image while still keeping the same aspect ratio. We're not cropping the image any differently. No matter how big or small this image is, we are containing the same aspect ratio. So this is where we don't need to use the picture element for this. We are going to use something else. And that is basically a plain old image tag where we are going to take advantage of the sizes and source sets attribute. So this is similar to what we just saw, except this is all happening inside the image tag. So by default, this is a 100% supported by all browsers, right? Because it's just an image tag. So let's take a look how that looks. So here is an image tag with the sizes and sources attributes. So first, I'm setting up some kind of media query here. I'm determining, okay, if my device is at least 720 pixels, the 50 VW there, that means viewport width, and each viewport width item is basically 1%. So you can think of this as 50% of the viewport width there. So what I'm saying here is if my device is at least 720 pixels, I want my image to be rendered at 50% the viewport width, comma, otherwise, I want my image to be served at 100% viewport width. So if my device is 720 or larger, my image will be half the viewport width. Otherwise, if it's 720 or smaller, my image will be full width, right? And then, so that's the first part of this. Now with the sources, I can tell the browser, and here are all these images, browser. You pick the one that you think is the best. In addition to providing the images, we're telling the browser how wide these images are, or how big these images are, right? So like 720W width, 1200W, 1900W, right? So we are then not only telling the browser how wide we want these images to be rendered at, but also how big are the images that we're providing the browser. Something that we were not able to do that before with the picture element. So this is how that will look, right? On the smaller devices, my picture will be rendered full width, and on the larger devices, it will be 50% the width. If, let's say for heroes images are usually, full width of our device, right? So for that, we don't need to do any type of media query. We can just say the sizes is 100% viewport width, meaning that we want our image to always render 100% regardless of the device size. And again, we are providing a set of images with a specific dimensions for those images, right? And so that will look like this on all devices. So now going back to our chart, now if we look at this, if we look at the image size relative to the viewport, now we've solved that, because now we can tell the browser what that is, or the browser will know what that is, because we are providing that as part of the sizes attribute, right? We're telling the browser how big this image needs to be rendered at. And the last item, the images dimensions, now the browser knows that, because when we're providing these images, we're telling the browser, hey, this is how big these images are. So the browser can now, when rendering the page, have all this information and determine what would be the best image possible to serve at any point, regardless of what the device size is. And it's not going to base that decision solely on how big the device is. It's going to look at, okay, how big is the device? What's the density of the device? How fast is this connection? Are there any user preferences set up on the browser that should be accounted for? All that, the browser can do that for us now. So we're not telling the browser what to do anymore. We're simply saying, hey, here's all this information about these images. You pick the one that you think is the best, because the browser, I would think that it will be smarter than us at that point when it's rendering the page. So that's the beauty of using the sizes and source set attribute on the image. So one thing that I like to do always when I create image styles, when I work on projects, especially projects that are heavy on images, is I like to document, what image styles were created, what machine names are for those, what the dimensions, what specifics, where they appear, where can they be used, and the same for responsive image styles. So that is something that I think adds a lot of context, and is something that we provide to our clients for reference, right, when they're trying to work with or maintain their own project, later on. So something that I found that is very useful. So here are some resources, and I shared the slides early on. I will share them again if anybody still wants them. But these are resources that you can go through, and there's a ton of them. It's extremely useful, all the resources here. So highly recommend you look into those. I'm going to do a quick demo. And I think we have, how much time do we have? We have, I would say, at least 15 minutes. And so I'm going to try to go through that, and then I'll see if I can have some time for questions if there are any. So I'm going to first go back to, this is just a vanilla Drupal 8 site that I put together. And I created a few image styles, as you can see here, right? So notice the naming convention that I'm using, 16:9 max, and some number there. I also created these ones here, portrait with a maximum of 200, 560, and 720. Again, this, just by looking at this image styles, you can tell that it doesn't matter where, I can use them anywhere, right? I'm telling it just simply, whether they're landscape or portrait, and what the maximum width are. So that really allows me to be able to use them anywhere I need to on my site. I'm not restricted to that. Let me first, let's go over the basic configuration for the most use case, right? For the one where you're not using the picture element, where you simply want to achieve resolution changes. And then we'll go through the picture element first. So I created image styles, and in addition to that, I created a couple of responsive image styles, right? So I have this, I call this cover image. I couldn't come up with a better name just because I didn't have enough context on this demo site to know what a good name would be. But there is a couple of image styles that I'm using that, this one is a little more explanatory, right? It tells me what the maximum is. And inside here, I'm going to edit this image style because this is where a lot of the configuration changes happen. And this is what sometimes, confuses people. So when you are not using the picture element, meaning when you are not trying to crop your images differently at different breakpoints, you need to use the breakpoints group responsive image. And this is coming from the responsive images module, which is part of core. But I don't know if later that's the case, but I know that it doesn't come enabled by default in Drupal for some reason. So just make sure that you have the responsive image module enabled, and you will see this option. And then you are given this option to set up a backup image, right, in case something fails. But the configuration here, notice that there are no breakpoints. It's just one simple configuration, right? And we are choosing the option that says to select multiple image styles and to use the sizes attribute, which is what we want. And here is giving us an option to set the sizes attribute preferences, where just like in the demo before, I said if my device is at least 720 pixels, I want my image to show 50% the width. Otherwise, show it at 100% the width, meaning that if it's smaller than 720, it'll be a full width image. And you can add all types of media queries here, or you can just exclude them and just say, I want my image to always be 100%, right? And then this here, this is where we pick the image styles that we created. So this is where we are kind of collecting the images for the source set attribute that we saw earlier, right? And so yeah, so this is the sizes attribute, and this is the source set attribute. So that is saved there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to an image here, and notice how it's a 50% the viewport width, and it doesn't look that way because there's space here and space here. But if we were to move the image all the way to the left, you will notice that it will be exactly at the 50% mark. Because my device here is larger than 1200 pixels. So, but as I resize my device, you will notice that right there, still 50%. I haven't reached 1200 yet, or 720. I can't remember what that number was, but now I do. I think, I don't know if it says 1200 or 720, I can't remember. But now I've hit that. Let me quickly do it. Okay. That's getting underway. So now I've hit that mark, and now my image becomes full width, right? So that's neat. But if I look at inspect the code here, we can see that I'm just using a plain old image tag. I have my source set, which is all those image styles that I selected, right? They're all here. And here is my sizes attribute is here. I'm telling it, 50% width, or 100% if it's smaller than 1200. So that's what's happening here. So notice the image there says 520 by 293. That's the browser telling me that that's the image that is selecting at this point. If I make this larger here and I inspect this, I assume that this image has changed to now 796, almost 800 pixels. So again, the browser is choosing that for me. I haven't really done anything to tell the browser what image to use. I just provided it with a bunch of images, told it how wide those images are and how wide I want them to be rendered at. And the browser is doing everything else for me. Okay, so so that's one example. The other example is when we use the picture element, when we want to crop the image differently between small devices and large devices. And for that, I'm using a module called image crop widget or something to that effect. And you first create some what is called crop types. You kind of predefine how you want the image to be cropped. And you set up some parameters, you can do aspect ratio, or you can do some soft limits or hard limits, and you can read more about this module. But that's kind of, you set up that so that you can kind of set up some parameters on how you want that image to be cropped. The one thing I didn't mention for the previous example is if I go to the manage fields for the content that I was just demoing, you will notice that all I did here for the image field, I set the format to responsive image, and then I chose the 16 by 9 cover image responsive image style that we created, right? That's how we're getting all those images that we create. For the picture element, I do have some image styles for that as well. And let's see here. And let me see, I'm going to look at this portrait image style. So what I'm doing for these ones, this is the one where I need to crop the image. What I'm doing is I'm setting up a manual crop, and this is what the widget cropping widget uses to allow you to crop this thing manually, right? So a manual crop, that's the effect that I'm using on the image style. And in the field, if I go, this is a different content type. I need to go into the form display for that content type. And for the field, the image field, I'm setting this widget by default will be image. And so you use the image widget crop. And here is where you tell it what crop type you want to use, right? This is the one that we created with the module, right? The crop type. So that's one thing. And then finally, on the display screen, the manage display for the image tag, again, we're setting responsive image again. And this time we are setting the responsive image style of portrait to landscape, right? This is where we created the responsive image style. And let's take a look at what that looks like, because it's going to be different than the one we created for the cover image, right? In this case, notice that I'm not using the responsive images styles breakpoint group. Instead, I'm using the theme. And the reason I'm using the theme is because my theme has specific breakpoints that I want to use, right? I predefined some breakpoints, and I showed you this earlier with the Bartik example. So the difference between this one is that because we need to tell the browser which image to use at each breakpoint and even what different screen densities, we have individual breakpoints for each of the different ones that we've defined on our theme breakpoint.yaml file. So here we're saying if the minimum width of the device is 851 pixels or larger, we are setting this option here. We want the image to be rendered at 100%, and we want all these image styles to choose from, right? For the 2x, will be the double that. So we're selecting different image styles. For medium devices, tablet devices, we're setting up the same option there, and we're choosing different image styles, right? This is why image styles is important to create them with great names, because you can use them over and over. And then for mobile devices, again, we're doing the same thing, always 100%, but different. This is where we want the portrait ones, right? The one that we created. So all the other ones will be landscape, but the mobile one will be portrait. So that is how that was done. So let's take a look. So I'm going to go into this page here. Not that one. I think it was, so I need to go into the full page for this one here. Okay. So again, by default, we said that we wanted our image to be 100%, right, on everything. So here is what an image like that looks like. And if I inspect this, you notice that now I'm not using just an image tag, I'm using a picture element, because the way I configure the image styles, right? And I have source sets here, things like that. So let's just quickly show this here. So I said that I wanted the image to always be 100% regardless. The difference, however, is that as I get smaller and smaller on the screen here, when I get to that breakpoint that I predefined, you'll notice that my image gets cropped into portrait part, where I just selected the little house that you see there as the most important piece of the image. I don't need to see everything else. So I've cropped it. So now I'm able, on a mobile device, I'm able to just focus on the actual main piece of that particular picture and not everything else like I would and here. So that is how the picture element will do that for us. But again, remember that we are telling the browser which image to use, right? And so there are times when that is necessary, right? Obviously, you want to avoid that as much as you can whenever possible. But again, same thing happens here. We are focusing on a specific area of the image. So this, I know we're running out of time, so I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions if there are any. And so I do appreciate it. I know it's quick, but I hope that this was useful in some way. So let me see if I can find any questions that I can. Okay, I need to scroll up. I'm not sure how far I need to scroll. All right, let me move from there. Hopefully some people have been having discussions here and answering questions for me, I hope. I appreciate if that's the case. So let's see here. Quickly move this closer to me. All right, let's see. Okay, question. Any tips on how to teach content editors about this image style so they upload images that are appropriate for the given field? That is not a content editor task, to be honest with you. I think as a developers, is something that we need to do ourselves to set up those parameters on, you know, how big our images should be, how wide they should render, because we don't want people to just upload any size image and break our layouts, right? So that will be a more of a developer responsibility to do, to be able to predefine, or a site builder in that case. A site builder can actually do that as long as they understand some of these concepts that we just covered today. Let me see. Another question here. So I'm just looking for Q, the letter Q. If you type the question without that, I may miss it. So did you show how to focus on the crop was set? It varies. There's a bunch of modules out there that let you do that. Some are better than others. I didn't want to get too much into that because I knew I was going to run out of time. But if anybody you look at the focal point is one of them that allows you to kind of move the cropping area to where you want it. Let me see if I can quickly, if I edit this page, for example, the way I did it with the widget is notice how here's my image, and when you move this here, this is where you kind of move and this is the area that will be cropped, right? So whatever area you want to make the most important, that's what you do. And you can resize this because we define hard and soft limits. You will get a warning when you reach those limits. Like right now, it's telling me that the soft limit has been reached. So meaning I shouldn't be reducing the size anymore, right? So that's what this. But there's other modules that you can use for cropping, and this is nice because your content editors can do that. You know, they can declare where the cropping should be. No such a thing as stupid question, but are all of this image preloaded into the browser? So it's preppy, or are they loaded on demand? So the way image styles work, surprisingly enough, is that image styles actually get created when the images are being rendered. I don't understand that, but that's kind of the way it works, meaning that you wouldn't have this pre-built ahead of time. The images, obviously can be uploaded, right? But when the page is rendering is when you need to, when Drupal actually creates this image style, which makes sense because it doesn't know by ahead of time which image styles each page or each image needs to use, right? So let's see here. Any other questions? I know we are running out of time. We have 1 more minute here. How do you manage tons of images uploaded by users or host doesn't support more than 100 gigabytes file storage? Yeah, it sounds to me like you're looking for maybe a third-party storage solution for that. I would think that would make more sense. I know that's what we've done with large project, where you are managing images through some kind of third-party system, like Amazon S3 or something like that. So that means images are never loaded in Drupal; they're just served on the Drupal site, but not loaded. I don't have too much experience with that. But okay, have you had clients request uploadable background images? Yes. So there are clients who will say, okay, rather than printing this image tag, I want to use a background image instead. Yeah, so you can do that. There's a module called Twig that allows you to actually use an image field or an image tag and set it as a background image. I would recommend you can look into that, and that way you can use those as background images rather than an actual image tag. Can you give us a link to the slides? Yes. Let me see. I think I may still have this in my clipboard. So there it is. All right, let's see. What is the module name? What is the module name? Module name. I'm not sure which module they're referring to. There's focal point. That's one. We do 2 sizes, 1400 and 820 and 960, 540 right now because it's easy to manage 2 styles instead of many. Would you still recommend? It all depends on the use case. Sometimes one image style will do just fine, right? If it's something that you only intend to serve a specific size, no matter the device, you can just get away with one image style. So don't feel like you have to create multiple ones. Obviously, when the use cases change, you may need to come up with more options that the browser can pick from. So question, potential case redesign happens and degree target area. Okay. All right. Well, I think we may be out of time. So I do want to thank everyone for your time. I hope this was useful. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter. You can reach out. If there's anything I can help you with, please let us know. We'll be more than happy to assist you with anything. We have several blog posts that touch on this. We've done presentations, so check that out. And thank you so much. Hope everybody has a great rest of the day. I hope that this was a fun event for all of you. It's different, but we hope to see each other again soon in person next year. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and take care.